Our next guest is concerned that attempts to rewrite history and cancel out aspects of our culture and our values may be our downfall. Please welcome the author of How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps and the #1 conservative podcast in the country, Ben Shapiro. Ben, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, look, here's my concern. You lay this out really well in your book. Are you concerned that if folks on the left read it, they understand what the right is trying to do, or is it just too big of an issue for you that you're not worried about that?
Well, I mean, I'm not really worried that the left is going to suddenly discover the roots of American philosophy. I think that they don't care about that. What they truly care about is pushing their view of America as innately flawed, as destructive, as rooted in racism, bigotry, and evil. And they're making the seductive case that they're going to replace all of the founding fathers' ideas with a very different set of ideas that are rooted instead in the idea of entitlement, in the idea of equality of outcome rather than equality before the law or equality of rights. And there's a certain seductive appeal to that. I mean, I talk at length in the book about the ideas, what I call disintegrationists, that if they didn't have appeal, they wouldn't be winning right now. They do have appeal. The appeal lies largely in the idea that personal responsibility doesn't exist, that you can always blame your own failures on the system, that the system itself needs to be changed in order to maximize your own personal profit and your own personal pleasure, and that all of history's flaws can be identified in structures of today that have to be torn down. There's something seductive about that, obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be quite so popular.
Yeah, something I find really interesting about your book is that you actually don't refer to people as on the right or on the left. Why is that?
The reason is because I don't think that this is a purely right-left phenomenon, meaning that there are a lot of people who identify as liberals who are not actually of the hard left, but that's a distinction that many liberals won't make themselves. They tend to think of themselves as of the left. So instead, by creating a distinction between folks who I think want the country to hold together with fundamental principles rooted in the Declaration of Independence and people who fundamentally want to remake the entire country and destroy all of those institutions, I think there are some people who consider themselves part of the left who actually will find themselves in the unionist camp. I was hoping to make the decision more difficult for a lot of people who may disagree with me on tax rates or the proper role of government in healthcare. I wanted to make it easier for them to embrace founding principles and a lot of the things I think they already believe, and more difficult for them to simply walk away from the argument.
Ben, as a conservative, I'll admit that some days I feel like we're losing the culture war. You see everything else getting canceled out, names getting changed, brands dumping their lifelong brand. How can conservatives turn the tide?
Well, I think that in the end, if things don't get better pretty quickly, conservatives are going to be left playing mutually assured destruction with the left. And I think what that will probably mean is that conservatives will have to found their own companies that are in exactly the same arenas as some of these other major corporations and simply withdraw their purchasing power from places they disagree with. Now, I don't prefer that. I would prefer that we all be able to buy the shoes that we want to buy and that we not care about the political affiliations of CEOs. But if the left is going to play this game where they destroy companies based on the political viewpoints of the CEO, or they're going to go after anybody who has a bad old tweet from 15 years ago or a not so bad old tweet from 15 minutes ago, then conservatives are going to be left with no ability to even have a conversation. You're going to end up with two essentially strata in American society, one conservative and one of the left. I prefer that we not go that way, but I'm having a hard time seeing how we don't, considering corporate America's willingness to simply mirror the policy priorities and rhetoric of the left.
You know, someone else that's mirroring that conversation, I feel like speaking a lot of platitudes lately, is Joe Biden. It seems like he's getting away with all the tough questions. He asked if he should defund the police. He says, no, but we should just restructure funding. Is this going to come back to bite him, do you think? Or is this going to work for him in the end? Because he's, as we know, kind of hiding out.
Well, I mean, so far it's working. He's lucky in so far as he has two factors. One, COVID means that he doesn't actually have to demonstrate any sort of energetic level on the campaign trail because there is no campaign trail. So that actually benefits him quite a lot. Second is the fact that this has turned into a referendum on President Trump as opposed to a referendum on Biden. Biden is uniquely non-vulnerable to the question of a referendum on himself personally. He's not alive. It turns out that it's hard to beat a dead horse, as I've said before. And because Biden is relatively inoffensive, he's relatively well-liked, people kind of know who he is, and they don't see him as threatening, President Trump's attempts to paint him as threatening are really not falling with any sort of serious impact right now. That may change depending on who he picks for VP. If he picks somebody who is perceived as radical for VP, if he picks Kamala Harris, for example, for VP, if he were to pick Stacey Abrams, which he's not going to, but if he were to, then that would obviously give Trump a lot to campaign against because then every commercial is just Biden saying, I'm a transitional figure, and then you make the commercial about the VP candidate.
Hey, Ben, in the book, you talk a lot about our culture and our history. A recent poll in the Wall Street Journal and NBC News looked at 900 voters, and they found that 56% agreed that American society is racist. Of that, 82% of those who agreed were Democrats, 30% Republicans, and 45 independents. We're also seeing polls about people, our founding fathers being bad people. This gets to the heart of what your book is about. We are erasing our history.
The rewriting of American history from a glorious story of founding principles not fully achieved or live up to in their time, and then gradually achieved over time through the heroism of figures black and white, and through the heroism of presidents and common people. That's the story of the United States, a story of the greatest, most prosperous, freest, and most tolerant nation in the history of the world. That story has been replaced with the 1619 Project, the Howard Zinnification of American history, where American history is instead viewed through the lens of various oppressions and exploitations. And that obviously has had a pretty major impact. I do think that Wall Street Journal poll showing 56% of Americans saying American society is racist, I think that people know what pollsters expect them to say. I really do. I think that the stat that shows that is the 45% of Americans saying American society is racist. My guess is that number in actuality is a fair bit lower. You're not going to get canceled these days for saying American society is racist. You're going to get canceled for saying American society isn't racist. I think everybody sort of knows where their bread is buttered culturally.
Ben, let me ask you this. You are a big baseball fan. One, what do you think of the current season, the rules, and the way everything's being played? And two, about this migration of kneeling that started in the NFL and is now going on in the MLB?
I think the corporations are attempting to avoid the controversial by being controversial. I think that they're sort of, I would say, relying on conservatives to continue consuming their product, even if they are mildly offended by the product, while knowing that if they don't virtue signal to the left actually turns off the TV. The left is much better at this than the right is. I think what they don't understand is that a lot of people are going to turn off the TV. I'm an MLB TV subscriber. I have very little interest in watching games if I'm going to be preached to about the idea that America is systemically racist in the middle of a baseball game. That is not why I turned into sports in the first place. I think there are a lot of people who think like me, and I think there will be some blowback there. As far as, the kind of COVID rules that they're applying right now, it seems to me that the media have very little leg to stand on, suggesting that it is perfectly fine to gather by the thousands to riot in Portland or riot in Seattle. But if we sit every third seat at a ballpark in the open air in the summertime, that this poses some sort of massive threat in terms of COVID. I get it, I do, but I think that is overblown in terms of what the actual risk factors are. The same way that the media were blowing out of proportion the risk factors for being on beaches early on in the pandemic. I think it would be foolhardy for them to cancel the MLB season, although I will say that the Players Union obviously made this very difficult in a way they didn't for the NBA or the NFL by saying we're not going to play inside a bubble. Instead, we're going to travel all over the country. If you do that, you know there are going to be COVID cases. But you also know that MLB players are disproportionately young and healthy, and that COVID disproportionately affects people who are not young and healthy.
Ben, something else I just recently saw is that Joe Rogan is moving out of LA and moving to Texas. I know that you're in LA. He said he's moving out of there because there's too many bums. He wants more freedom. COVID's running rampant. You live there. What's your take on LA? Are you happy?
No, I think that Joe's right. This place has turned into a trash heap. It's amazing. Barack Obama talked about a Green New Deal here. In LA, we've been using infrastructure dollars to pay for porta potties under the freeways for the various homeless encampments. We have the Brown New Deal out here. It's very exciting stuff. LA in my lifetime, I've lived my entire life in LA, and it used to be a pretty, I wouldn't say it was ever a really well-run city, but it was at least fairly clean. Now the levels of trash on the streets, open needles on the streets, the level of homelessness is exorbitant. And it's not good for homeless people either. If you are mentally ill or drug addicted, living on the street, with risk of COVID, that seems like not a very great living arrangement to me. LA has basically decided to run itself directly into the ground. So I definitely hear where Joe is coming from. And with a 13.3% state income tax rate and Joe making $100 million from Spotify, I can certainly see why he's saying to himself, why am I paying $13 million to the state of California so I can have open needles outside my office?
Yeah, that's a pretty big incentive. Ben, let me brag on you for 1 second. You graduated from high school, if I get my facts straight, 2 years early. You graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School. You had 2 books published by the time you were 17. I believe this current book is your 11th or 12th. What was it that inspired you to do all of this at that age? And frankly, do it against the grain, right? At 17, 18, I was just looking to get outside and have fun, never mind espouse conservative values. You were out there writing a book, starting talk on Morning Talk. What was the driving force behind you? Is it apparent? Is there something inherent that makes you, what got you there?
My parents were always very encouraging. They always loved the fact that I was into history and into politics, and they always surrounded me with people of a variety of different viewpoints with whom I could discuss issues. Honestly, I thought when I was younger and I was going to college, I thought that I was going to double major in music and genetic science because I was a classical violinist at the time. And when I got on college campus and I saw at UCLA the UCLA Daily Bruin, I opened it up. One of the first days I was there was an editorial comparing Ariel Sharon, then the prime minister of Israel, to Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi. And I walked in, I said, I'd like to write a counter to that. And so it began. So it was mostly just being upset with falsehood being purveyed in major newspapers, because Daily Bruin had like 16,000 people reading it every day. And it sort of moved on from there. And just as far as getting things done, I mean, as you can tell, I have a pretty high RPM, and the motor keeps running, although my kids are doing their best to take the energy out of me, for sure. I have 3 under the age of 7, so.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know that. I know that feeling. You know, when I was in the White House, and even when I left, there were some pretty nasty things said about me. And I admit, you know, that they still sting here and there. You've been very out there with your thoughts and your beliefs and your values. And some pretty nasty things have been said about you. The one that I think is the most ironic is when people call you anti-Semitic or a Nazi. As an Orthodox Jew and someone who's very well versed in your religion, I think that one takes the cake. Do those criticisms still sting?
Sure. I mean, I'm a human being, and just like everybody's a human being, you think that your skin is thick enough, and your skin is never thick enough to not at least feel mildly irritated by the overwhelming waves of hatred that come. And it's usually intermittent. You know, I tend to trend on Twitter, I would say once every 3 weeks on average. And when that happens, it's you know, irritating. But the good news is that I've uninstalled Twitter from my phone, so I just don't have to pay attention to it. So that's kind of the only way to deal with it, is to build a bubble around yourself of people you trust, while still allowing the people you trust really have to be able to give you honest criticism. The key is to distinguish between people giving you honest criticism and people just looking to tear you down.
Yeah, I can totally get that. Hey, Ben, thanks for being here. I appreciate you making so much time. Congratulations on your next book. I imagine within 6-7 months, we're going to see the next one. And congratulations on being a great dad.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Newsmax TV is now America's fastest growing cable news channel. We give you the real news you need. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, share it with your friends. Newsmax TV streams live on YouTube for free. Newsmax TV, real news for real people.